Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Drawing Down the Stars. I'm Snappy, and today we're joined by Dr. Caroline Tully. So, Caroline is a practicing witch uh, she is an expert on paganism, and as well, she is a teacher of archaeology at the University of Melbourne in Australia. So, I brought Dr. Tully on today because we want to have a nice, deep conversation into her research, which is all focused around the Aegean and around paganism. But to start, I want to start by hearing your story. When I was looking into your research, it was really interesting how you kind of transitioned from Catholicism, got involved in paganism in the 80s, and then went back to school much later. Can you tell me about that experience?
Sure thing. Okay, well, thanks for having me anyway. So, yes, so I was a Catholic schoolgirl, which was all very boring and very oppressive. I went to a very horrible school that was, full of very evil nuns and horrible teachers that were just horrible and very bullying. Now you would call it bullying, and you wouldn't. Your parents would make a complaint and stuff. But in those days, we were all our parents were scared of the church, and they were scared of, even though they were paying the school fees, they were scared of the school, so they'd do what they said. Anyway, so I was actively not interested in religion all that time. And then after school, I accidentally ran into this group of people in this pub in the city, and they led me to this guy who they were all terribly scared of, but because he was into magic. And I had no idea what is this. And at his house, he had this bookshelf, and I was just looking in the bookshelf, and there's all these magic books. I'm like, what is this? What is it? And I'm just sort of perusing them, and I'm like, oh, and it was really intriguing. I was like, what is this fascinating topic? I've got to read, as many books as possible. So eventually, I ended up becoming his girlfriend like quite a bit later in time. And another person that lived with us, his dad had been a witch, as in a Wiccan witch. And his dad was an artist as well, but his dad died, and we inherited more books from his dad. And so then we had more books, and some of them I was a bit too scared to look at, like, the Anton LaVey books. I didn't look at them for several years. I was like, oh, that's too scary. But, we had tons of books, and my boyfriend, who was already a practicing magician, he'd been a witch, but he thought it was too girly. So he decided to do the more manly ceremonial magic type of thing. But he was kind of teaching me, or I guess he was sort of being the mentor while I was on a loose sort of study trajectory, basically directed by him. And eventually we moved to the country to hang out with the witches that this other guy that we lived with's dad had been friends with. So they were Alexandrian witches. But back then I hadn't heard of any traditions I didn't know there were different types. The type of witchcraft I'd been reading about was Starhawk. She really didn't say anything about, there's Gardnerians and Alexandria. I just thought it was, the ceremonial magic's one thing. Witchcraft is sort of like a bit of an easier version of that. And so then through these Wiccans in the country, they were back to the earth people. And so they were involved in festivals, hippie festivals. And also they founded a pagan festival back before I met them, in about 1980 or 81, called the Mount Franklin Annual Pagan Gathering. And so because I was now living at their place, we went to that. And that was, the first time I met other pagans. Because before we'd moved to the country, and I was just reading about paganism and practicing with my partner, who was already knowledgeable about it, I was just like, wow, imagine if there's other people doing this. Imagine if I met them. I can't imagine how I can ever meet anybody else, because we didn't have the internet or anything. And then so through these Wiccans up in the country, I met other pagans. And I also went to, there was this fantastic alternative lifestyle festival called the Confest, the Down to Earth Confest. And I went to that, and I was just loving it so much. It was just this fantastic utopian, it was like went for about a week, and it was just all sorts of alternative lifestyle stuff. So I got introduced to all that. So that I was about... So I lived in the country from about 20 to 20, 2. Then I moved back to Melbourne and moved in with a friend of these Wiccans who was a naturopath and another witch, and lived with him, and so kind of did herby stuff with him. I'd done herbal stuff when I lived in the country, but he was much more, he'd been studying officially at a natural therapy school, so he was sort of a little bit more knowledgeable rather than me and the holistic herbal book, and then sort of just growing stuff. So what happened then? Oh, then through him I met some more witches, and it's all very complicated. So these other witches were training with some Wiccans in Canberra, which is another city, and they were a bit ambitious. And I simultaneously had discovered through my other Wiccan friends up in the country the magazine Green Egg, run by the Church of All Worlds. And I subscribed because I thought, oh, this is really interesting. And then I sent a copy to my friends up in Canberra, and they thought, oh my God, we're going to import the Church of All Worlds, and it's going to be the first pagan church in Australia. And I was like, because I didn't think there was any point in actually joining the church, because I thought, well, it's American and we're here. We can't really interact with them, so there's not really any point. But these friends of mine said, yeah, we're going to import this, and we're going to run the Church of All Worlds. And that was all very successful. So we had several pagan festivals, and we went through several of the initiations of the Church of All Worlds. My friend Fiona, who was one of the people who imported it, she went to America, got it ordained with like Oberon Zell and Morning Glory and all those very famous people. And of course, took psychedelic drugs with them. And then she came back, and unfortunately, well, you know how the Church of All World are polyfidelitous and polyamorous? Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, my friend Fiona, her husband, he was, a lot of people love polyamory, and it's great if it works, but in their relationship, there's a few problems, and Fiona just got really sick of him, so they broke up. And so because they'd broken up and they were running the Church of All Worlds, the whole thing, they kind of lost interest, and the whole thing just got ruined, and then other people took it over and it moved. We all sort of lost interest. Right. Meanwhile, because back then everyone used to swap magazines. All pagan groups wrote little magazines, and you'd swap them with other pagan groups. And at the Church of All World Friends' house, they had, among other things, they had an Ordo Templi Orientis magazine. And I, of course, because my ex-boyfriend, who introduced me to magic, he was very into Crowley. So I knew about Crowley. The first magic book I ever read was Confessions of Aleister Crowley, even though I was probably far too young to understand it because it's so fat, and I was just reading and reading, and anyway.
Wow.
So I'd heard of the OTO, but I thought they sounded really scary and probably horrible and dangerous. But when I saw this magazine, this is probably 7 years later than from when I originally thought they were scary. I was like looking at the magazine, which was called Beastly, and I was like, oh, this doesn't seem too scary. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to write to them, and I'm going to meet them and see what they're like. And so I wrote to them. That ended up being the Sydney branch. So they put me in charge, in contact with the Melbourne branch, who I arranged a meeting, which still, in the old days, you would do these you'd write letters to people or meet them, and it could be quite scary because, occultists used to be kind of weird.
Right.
So, but now they're just like,
and you're a young woman on your own kind of thing too, right? Huh? And you're just a young woman on your own meeting strangers, right? You'd have never seen before. It's a different world.
Like once I met the only Church of Satan member that I could find in Australia. This is a long, long time ago, and I met him in a pub, a very crowded pub, so there'd be lots of witnesses. He was a weirdo, but he wasn't too bad. But yeah, it was always a risk to go and meet these people. So I went to meet these OTO people, and I thought they're either going to be really annoying or really interesting. And so I went to this flat and I met it, and it was these three guys. So, the OTO is organized into lodges. I can't remember if Oasis is the top or lodge, but whatever. Bigger groups and then smaller groups called camps. And this group was a camp, and there were three guys there, but there were other members who I didn't meet at that time. And I was super impressed because they said, okay, we'll do a Gnostic mass. And I was like, oh, wow. And they didn't have any women at that meeting. So the roles were played by three men. And so one of them, Barry Sherman, was the priestess. And I was super impressed because when he invoked Nui, I could see this sort of bluish sort of, like a misty blue and this little sparkly stars and stuff like that. And
Wow.
and forever after, we called him Barry Babylon. And of course, so then I joined the OTO and in the Melbourne branch, but there was always a rivalry between the Melbourne OTO and the Sydney OTO. And the Melbourne OTO was because, the OTO used to be a bit wilder, but it got really tidied up in, I think, probably the late 80s or early 90s. And it started to be run as a very tight ship rather than a crazy ship. And so in Sydney, the Sydney people still are very rule abiding, whereas in Melbourne, they were a bit, creative, let's say. And for example, now I know it's OTO policy everywhere now. You can't have a male priestess. It's not allowed. And
Right.
but I just think that's silly because I had witnessed, Barry doing a very good priestess role. When I was in the OTO, sometimes we would swap, we would do, like I'd do the priest and some guy would do the priestess. We'd swap the roles around just to see what they were like. And also in, ceremonial magic, you might invoke a deity who might be a male deity. I know in some traditions, like say in ancient Greece, a female would often be the priestess of a female deity, although the Delphic Oracle was certainly the priestess of a male deity. I just don't think the gods care if you are a male. And look at voodoo, So, someone will invoke Ursuli and they might be a man and they'll have to, or they won't have to, but they'll sort of do all the mannerisms and deal, use the clothing and the stuff that she uses. It's just not about
Right. I always
so,
think like with the Greek tradition, you have, you have the dressing up like Dionysus, the cross-dressing that Hercules does, right? You also have the priest of Cybele, right? That whole tradition, and all of the castrati, the various versions across history. It's like there's a lot of this gender play that you see in all of these kind of. Yes, it's kind of weird that they would fixate upon that. And you see that even to this day in the OTO, it's become quite a contention with like non-binary identities as well, So it's interesting.
Yeah. Some of it I think has got to do with, Crowley's various formulas, say like ALHIM or ALI, ALHIM is like this heterosexual one, and ALIM is this homosexual, and it's got to do with fertility and non-fertility and this and that and this and that. But, all this is also, it's very experimental. So I think in many ways, I think people should be allowed to experiment, and they probably do experiment with something like the Gnostic Mass, but apparently you're not officially allowed to say this is a Gnostic Mass, and you're not officially meant to do it for a public audience.
Right.
So again, it's kind of this taking over of the OTO as a business or, yeah. So anyway, and, then sort of bossing everyone around. So
yeah, where do you go from there though? So where do you go? Yeah.
Well, basically, we ended up all doing a walkout from the OTO because of this rivalry with Sydney. So I left them for ages, but then I rejoined in 2000. So I left them in about 97, rejoined temporarily in about 2004 to maybe 2006. And so where did I go after the OTO? What was I even doing? I think I just got into more witchy stuff. I was looking a lot at the history of witchcraft and trying to understand trying to really understand the witch trials history, not so much ancient witchcraft. So I was looking a lot at witch trial history, like Carlo Ginzburg and different authors. But again, I wasn't like an academic scholar or anything. So I was just sort of following my nose. No one was helping me. I just had to go, oh, what's that book that I accidentally saw in the bookshop? Wow. Like Carlo Ginzburg's Ecstasies or something. I was like, and that was so hard to read. I forced myself to read that. And I was like, I don't know if I got anything out of that. Although, everyone loves Carlo Ginzburg now as the counter sort of argument to Ronald Hutton. We can talk about that later. So I was very, I was just practicing by myself. And also because there's all these rules in magic, I didn't know, and I didn't have anyone to help me at this stage because I had no more mentors through this period. I was doing experimental rituals and thinking, what can I leave out? What's okay to leave out in this ritual? What will happen? I just have to experiment myself because I don't have any teachers. Because when I used to be with like my first teacher, I'd often say to him, I'd go, okay, I'm writing this ritual, but like if I do this, is this going to happen? I'm asking these, and sometimes he just wouldn't even answer me. And I thought, oh, he must be testing me. He must want me to work it out myself. But it also could have been he actually didn't know the answer and he just didn't want to look uncool. So yeah, so I was doing a lot of experimentation. I was and then what else did I do? So what year? I can't remember. And then it's a blur. Then it all just becomes a blur. So but eventually, do you want to know how I got into? And I was
what brought you to academia and why like ancient Aegean studies?
Yeah. Okay, two things brought me to academia, and they were, well, actually three. Well, two things. One was the publication in 1999 of Ronald Hutton's book, The Triumph of the Moon, but I didn't get that till 2000 and I had a newborn baby, and so I was reading this book and breastfeeding my baby early in the morning. Because Ronald Hutton did a historical investigation into all these claims of practitioner, mostly Wiccans, who'd had these, our religion is, Paleolithic. I was initiated by so-and-so. I have this lineage, so there's the practitioner history, and he, and some of which was outrageous claims. And he looked at that as a historian. So that was quite revelatory. And it was also very entertaining to read his book. And on the other hand, I was looking at pagan reconstructionism, which is the attempt to practice historically correct ancient pagan religions, as opposed to something like Wiccan-derived paganism, which is much more, really comes from the late 19th century ceremonial magic revival. So, Wiccan paganism is much more casting the circle, like a magical circle, like a magical ritual, whereas ancient paganism is not about casting the circle at all. It's a completely different thing. So there were these Yahoo groups. Everyone was on Yahoo groups, email groups, and they were really informative and fantastic. And that whole thing has never translated to social media. Like, how there was the demise of the Yahoo groups, and it's like, oh, it's because of the rise of Facebook. But the really good conversations and stuff you actually learned on the Yahoo groups, it never actually went to Facebook. It just went away. So anyway,
now you have Discord. You need to check out Discord. That's the new. It's very similar to Yahoo groups.
I don't even know how to get there. I know there's a lot of things that I probably should be looking at, but I kind of I guess I just don't really know about them. But you've just told me. I have heard of Discord lots of times, but I don't think I've ever even looked. But I will. So Yahoo groups. I was in these ones about, say, Religio Romana or Hellenic paganism or Egyptian or Norse religion. And I was like, wow, these people are really knowledgeable. This is so interesting. And so I got I got the idea of where these sources, where are the sources, the ancient sources that these people are using, where do you get them, and this and that. So I had Ronald Hutton, who had sort of deconstructed the kind of Wiccan claims, and then I had pagan reconstructionism, but also I got onto this academic email list, even though I wasn't an academic, and it was the email list of the Pomegranate Journal, which is the International Journal of Pagan Studies, which now, 23 years later, I'm an associate editor of. But back then,
which is amazing.
I know, yeah. But back then, I couldn't, I was like, wow, this is so interesting, this email list, because people I knew were on it, so I was able to get on it. And I was like, what are they talking about? I don't know what they're talking about. So I could see that there were these really brainy people, and they seemed to know a lot about pagan religions, and they were talking a lot about them, but they were using these really difficult terms, and I like academic speak, and I just can't understand what they're talking about. And I was also feeling quite annoyed because I was feeling like, I really want in on this conversation, and I'm going to have to do all this sort of study to work out, to even be able to understand their language. Because at one stage I had this friend who was, he's an academic, historian. He's younger than me, but seems much older because he's so brainy. Anyway, he did a PhD on called The Figure of the Witch, and he used to come over to my house to talk to me about the witchcraft scene because he wasn't really in the scene and I was in the scene. And he would talk to me in this academic language, and I just said, I just can't understand you. I don't know what you're talking about. I can't understand those words. Anyway, years later, now I can understand those words. So Ronald Hutton's book, Pagan Reconstructionism, and the Pomegranate email list, which was called Natrel, which was the Nature Religion Scholars email list, that all got me involved in, I guess, it made me realize there was more to the study of paganism and magic and witchcraft than the sort of books that you would get at occult bookshops. But I didn't actually become an academic till in about 2003 or 4 in the next street from here. People, you know how people throw things out in the street.
Right.
Someone's thrown out a stack of these readers from the Melbourne University Classics course. So things like, Underworld and Afterlife or Ancient Magic. And we found them when we went, wow, look at these. And we just took them home. And I was looking through them and I was going, oh, these are so interesting. And then I thought, you know what? Maybe I could do a course at Melbourne Uni. But then I thought I saw some of the things the students had to do, like they had to do a public presentation to the class. And I went, oh, no, I wouldn't be able to do that. No, absolutely not. No, I probably can't. Okay. But then I ended up doing one, I can't remember how, but that's right. I found out about community access program, which is where you just do one subject. So I just did classical mythology, and then I found out accidentally that you could do a graduate diploma. So if you've already got a degree, which I have a Bachelor of Arts in Fine Art, which is tapestry weaving and printmaking from like the 90s, if you already have a degree, you can get into a graduate diploma at, well, this was Melbourne University, but probably at other universities as well, which is more like, it's like I'm doing a major just in one subject. So you can't just do anything. You have to do, say, graduate diploma in classics and archaeology or graduate diploma in geography or something. You can't just, because a lot of the people who go into the university as a Bachelor of Arts, they can do, a range of subjects.
Right.
But a graduate diploma is just, you're only in one department and you're doing only that department stuff. So I did a graduate diploma in classics and archaeology, and I did, because I was working, I could only do one subject per semester, which I like anyway, because I like to get really, really, really into the topic. And so I studied amazing things like ancient magic, Roman religion. I actually went there to study Roman religion in particular.
Wow.
But I got distracted into it. When I found out there was such a thing as ancient Israelite religion, I was like, what? And I was like, oh my God, I've got to find out about that. And so I got distracted onto lots of other topics, and I just kept going there. Then I did a postgraduate diploma. So a graduate diploma is equivalent to like a 3-year degree, but it's I can't remember how long it takes because I did it part-time, but it doesn't take 3 years. And then I did a postgraduate diploma, which is like equivalent to 4th year or honors. And that's, again, I did that part-time, although I had a long service leave from my job as a tapestry weaver. So I was able to do 2 subjects, although some friends of mine would go to work full time and they'd do 3 subjects. And I'm like, how can you even do that?
That's wild.
Yeah. And then I found out that, so, you're paying these big fees. They're deferred fees, but you're paying fees. So now I have a big, what's called a HEX debt, as do all students, ex-students, which I don't plan to ever pay off, but whatever. I think university should be free. I think everything should be free. Anyway,
right.
But I found out that for a PhD, you don't have to pay to do it. They pay you if you get a scholarship. So I tried really hard to get good marks so that I could get a PhD scholarship. So then I could leave my job as a tapestry weaver and go, which I did. So I got this scholarship, which it goes for about 3.5 years and then it runs out. And although I was doing a PhD for much longer than that, so I could leave my job at the tapestry workshop, where you can't read books all day because you have to do work, and I could go and do this PhD in Aegean Archaeology at the Melbourne Uni. But I didn't plan to do Aegean Archaeology. I thought I was probably going to do something like ancient Israelite religion, the tree cult, Asherah, that sort of thing. And the first meeting I went to with my supervisor, Louise Hitchcock, she goes, and she was quite scary. She said, okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to look at Aegean, you're going to look at the Aegean, and you're going to compare it with Cyprus and Israel. And I went, okay, because I was really scared of her. I'm not scared of her anymore, but she is a bit scary. And so I really had, the only background I had in Aegean archaeology, I'd done one semester of a subject with her. So I had to get across the whole of Aegean archaeology, not the whole, but a lot. And then I had to get across Cyprus. And oh my God. And so it was just exhausting, because if I'd just done one topic, like one region, I probably would have finished much faster. But because I had to do this Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean, it took a really long time. And also because they kept giving me teaching jobs. And it's very hard to do your PhD if you're teaching stuff.
Right.
So that's a very long story, but that's how I got into. Oh, I guess I should just say that one of my aims of doing academic research is it was always to translate, because I used to work for magazines. I was always writing for a pagan audience, for lots of different pagan magazines. And so going to the university and finding out about ancient religions from non-pagans, people who had no interest in paganism at all, they were just, they had other interests which happened to include ancient religion. I was always interested in wanting to translate this to a pagan audience and go, wow, look how interesting this is, that, I found this out. Here's an article. So yeah, I was always interested in discussing it with pagans. But, there's a real, there's a bit of a bad attitude. People sort of hate academics. They think they're evil, they're lying, or they've got secret, or they're towing the party line. What party line? So there's a big distrust. There's distrust. And,
no, for sure. I think some of that distrust comes from, it's years ago, right? There was a very, you have a very old school Christian lens. And it also, like my friend, Dr. Ammon, who's going to be joining us later, right? Because he wrote a book called The Chemical Muse, which focuses on entheogen use within Greece and ancient Rome. And they wouldn't even let him put that in his PhD thesis to begin with. He tells a story where his advisors are like, the founders of Western society wouldn't do drugs recreationally, and so there's all of this backlash against certain topics, right? That you do see.
Yeah. And that's reminding me of, do you know that book called The Immortality Key by, what is his name? I've got
Brian Murarescu.
Yeah, Brian Murarescu. And
Emin was actually an advisor on that book, by the way.
Oh, right. Because, and there was that classicist whose name I've forgotten, who wrote The Road to Eleusis.
Dr. Carl Ruck. Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, no, not Ruck. It might be Ruck anyway, but whoever
Ruck
it was.
was one of the writers on that. There's a couple others, but he's the main classicist.
Yeah. So, and apparently that ruined his career. Yeah, so I think there's certainly certain subjects that are. Look, people think even just religion, even just studying ancient religion, like in Aegean archaeology, people think there's a lot more important stuff to study than ancient religion, and yeah, they're not super interested in it mostly, but
right.
Yeah, it's weird. I think the thing is, most of them, they're not from a pagan background. So when you study ancient religion or contemporary religion, you're not supposed to go native, as in you're not supposed to actually believe in it or anything. But a lot of the Western esotericism scholars coming out of Scandinavia, I don't know if any of them have gone native, but certainly any of those particular ones. But there's definitely Western esotericism scholars who've definitely, who are definite Thelemites and things like that.
I see it as kind of like an open secret, right? Because it's still taboo within a lot of these academic institutions to talk about if you're doing that kind of stuff. But you do see some of these radical people, like I think of like Dr. Patricia McCormack in philosophy, or, like Dr. Ammon in classics. And you're getting more people coming forward, but like, there's all the speculation about writers from the past, like if someone like Robert Graves, who wrote The White Goddess, if he was actually practicing as much as he says, or what was going on there, it's interesting.
The thing is with Patricia McCormack is because she's unbelievably brilliant and clever and amazing, she's respected, within the university system because she's so amazing, and she puts out and because I think she's a philosopher, isn't she? And philosophers can sort of do this quite speculative stuff. I remember she wrote, I've actually got, the A Human Manifesto, but she wrote it came out just before COVID. And remember when COVID came out, all the humans were like, humans are threatened. Don't say anything bad about humans. We're threatened. Humans are the best. Oh no, humans are threatened. It was so annoying, which is kind of leads on to my beef about like everyone's forgotten the environment now.
Right.
Because of COVID. Remember before COVID, everyone's like, oh, I'm so worried about the environment. And then COVID comes out. It's like, toilet paper. We've got to have toilet paper. Stampede. It just became so human and selfish. And I thought, imagine if there was a worse disaster. People would just be breaking into your house.
Right. I feel like we're seeing this ongoing thing where people are being more and more disconnected from nature. Like, I don't mean to be weary of technology, but COVID heightens this. It forced everyone inside. People are not connected to the natural world, so many people aren't even aware of the degradation that's outside their window,
Yeah, and which reminds me, in regard to plague, during COVID, me, my supervisor, and my other supervisor from before developed a book called, it's basically just it's called Plague in the Ancient World. And it's got all these articles about ancient disease. And it just really shows how this threat to humans by microbes is not new. It's been killing us for centuries because people were so outraged. They're like, how dare a disease try and attack us? We're the most important species on the planet. It's so human-centric. And because we're used to fabulous medicine for the last, say, 150 years, we're just outraged if a disease, it's like, no, this disease can't beat us. No way. And it's like, with, say, I'm going on a bit of a rant about that now. Everything I say is a rant.
I love
like,
it.
in the old days, you would, you might have 14 pregnancies and maybe 7 of those or so would die. And it was just like, that's a bit sad, isn't it? But now if you have, like a miscarriage, people are like, oh, I'm so traumatized. I had a miscarriage for 3 weeks. And it's like, yeah, that's called being, that's what uteruses do. They don't always work. But we just think we're so fantastic now that we can't be touched by anything. And I do think people are kind of a little bit, with the environment, it's constantly this bad news. And so people are like, I'm not listening. But there is a hilarious movement called the ecosexuality movement, which is founded by Annie Sprinkle and Beth Stevens. And it's about having an erotic relationship with nature. So instead of having a mother goddess or mother earth, it's lover earth. Because a lover you want to please. With a mother, you're like, oh, what are you going to give me? Whereas with a lover, it's like, how can I help you? How can we have a really nice time together? And so they've got this book. It's called Assuming the Ecosexual Position. I've got a review of it.
That's really powerful. I'll have to look into that because it really makes me think of a lot of these pagan ideas, like with the you know, that idea of like the cosmogonic eros, and you're connecting to divinity through that erotic sense, that erotic connection, you know, which is a very powerful thing that you see it like in when I was reading your work to bring into your work, you're talking about these Minoan goddesses who are entering these ecstatic states, or these priestesses, and then they're having these connections with these spirit beings. In some of your interviews, you even use this word fairy. Can you talk about what's going on here? Like what do you see in these rings? I'm just going to also bring up one of these images here so that people can see. That was with the tree worship, but with the fairy. Let me see. Sorry, we have.
So yeah, something with a little, like a
Here we
hovering
go.
finger. Okay, so I'll first have to do a bit of background explanation. So Minoan religion, which the stuff we're looking at here is late Minoan. So that's from about, say, 1700 to about 1500 BCE. And although it's so sophisticated and amazing, anyway, you'd think, oh, how advanced they were. Anyway, so there's no deciphered text. They had text that which we call, there's Cretan hieroglyphic and there's Linear A, but both of them are undeciphered. And then there's Linear B, which is a type of Proto-Greek, and that was the language of the Mycenaeans when they came over and took over Crete. So the Mycenaeans are from mainland Greece, and they used the Cretan Linear A to invent a script for their Proto-Greek language, and that script is called Linear B. So we have Linear B, we don't have it. So we haven't deciphered Linear A. So in order to study ancient Minoan religion, the evidence we look at is visual art, architecture, and the landscape, and comparative sort of examples from other close by regions like, say, Egypt or Cyprus and places like that, or even Greece. And so this is a drawing of an image on a gold ring. There's all these, there's about probably about 300 known gold rings, either as actual rings or as imprints on clay. So you can know, it was a ring, but the ring's gone. We've only got the imprint because they were seal rings. And so they were used by administrators, is what we mainly call them, to sort of verify documents or verify produce coming in and things like that. And so from these, and there's also seal stones. So seal stones were often worn on a leather string, maybe around your neck or on your wrist, and they were also stamped into clay to verify whatever they were verifying. And there's about 11,000 images from these seal stones and gold rings, and the genre is called glyptic. So it's Aegean glyptic. So this image, this is one of the really beautiful ones. So some are more artistically skillful than others, and this is one of the examples of the extremely beautiful ones. And can you hear that squeaky little noise? There's a squeaky noise. Anyway,
Yeah.
So basically, there's these. Oh, it's such a long story. So another thing is, it's hard to tell who is a god or goddess and who is a human in Minoan religion because they all wear the same clothes. For example,
I wanted to ask you about that because I remember reading Richard Evans' work, and he kind of claims that they're aniconic and that they don't have any deities. What is your perspective?
And I believe aniconism is one aspect of Minoan religion, as it is of ancient Israelite religion and Cypriot religion. So that in Minoan religion, there's no statues of deities like there is in Greek and Roman and Egyptian. There's some small things that could be deities, like there's the snake goddesses or snake goddess and priestess. There's the Palakastro Kouros, which is a male figure made of ivory that's about probably, what is that, 40, I can't remember how high he is, but he's less than half a meter, I'm pretty sure. But so there's a lot of these statues are small, but there's no cult statues. There's some ceramic feet. Maybe they belonged to a wooden statue that got burnt. We don't know. So what I think is that Minoans performed religion, like, you know, in voodoo, how you become possessed and you perform the deity. There's a lot of images of enthroned women. They're either sitting on altars or they're sitting on rocks or on mountains. Yeah, so there was an enthroned one. That gold ring that you, that was only discovered in 2015. That's an example of, there's a lot of examples of these seated women. So here we've got some sort of bird, which may be a deity. So the deities may have appeared in bird form, and she's sitting on a footstool, and then we don't really know what that person is holding. Are they holding a sword? We really don't. Is it a horn? Who the hell's
cup? Maybe. I think of like all of that cup imagery we see in the later
female. I think she's holding a mirror, but I'm talking about like that little. Okay,
I see.
So I only suggest that's a mirror because I'm comparing it to other examples of seated women that hold things so they look a bit like an Egyptian type of mirror. But back to the thing about the fairies. So so there's the large figures. So we've got the large figures. In this case, we think they're probably human women, and then you can see. To the right of the central woman, there's a tiny little female figure, and so you can tell she's wearing a Minoan skirt, which is a very characteristic skirt, and she's hovering or descending from the sky. And you might go, oh, is she descending, or is she actually just really far away? No, the consensus is mainly she's descending because you can see how her toe is pointed, which suggests she's not standing on the ground. And also the dots behind her, that's her hair. So all these dots are hair, although some people think they could also, with the large figures, be signifying the trance state or the psychedelic state. Anyway, so hovering figures, like there's that little female figure, she's hovering. So again, the whole question is, what is that? Is she, I guess, well, the consensus is there's two types of visions: ecstatic epiphany and enacted epiphany. And ecstatic epiphany is when someone is seeing a little hovering figure. So whether it's the human figure or whether it's, you can see other hovering figures here. We've got a snake, we've got an eye, we've got the thing that's near the snake's head. That no one knows what that is. Is it a heart with blood coming off it? People call it a chrysalis. It could be a type of vessel. It could be a globular rhyton. We don't, and the thing that looks like the bean pod, that is, I know it's going to sound weird in this example, but that is in the category of the shooting star hovering figure. So sometimes it looks like a shooting star, sometimes it looks like a sprig of wheat, but in this image, I know it looks like a bean pod, but it's probably one of the shooting star type of thing. So these little hovering things are an example of ecstatic epiphany, and the people sitting on the thrones or mountains or rocks or under trees, and often someone's bringing something to them like an offering. Those people, those seated people, are doing enacted epiphany. So they're doing that possessed, or in my opinion, they're representing a deity in human form, because there's no cult statues. So I believe Minoan religion was a shamanic or shamanistic. So not necessarily. So I use shamanic to mean actual shamanism, whereas shamanistic to mean like shamanism. Because there's so many arguments about shamanism at the moment, you've got to be really careful with the terms you use. So I wouldn't say, the Minoans were shamans. I say the Minoans they might have been shamans. So we'll say shamanistic. So they look like they might have been shamans.
Yeah, you have that wonderful article where you talk about this universal shamanism, and you see all of these elements that appear around that area. And you identify, I'm trying to remember, there was entheogenic use, there was ecstatic posture, right? Like these they're holding these almost yogic-like places of body movements, and then they're engaging some kind of sonic sound. You talk about drum use in the article. And then there was a third one that they were doing. I'm trying to remember now. A third. Well, one thing I wanted, but one thing I wanted to ask you about is this entheogenic use, because it's something that really interests me because it becomes so central to the later kind of mystery traditions and the pagan traditions we see in like Greece and Rome. And also, like, I studied a lot of the Indian background and like a lot of Harappa, and you see some of the similar plants. So like I noticed you see a lot of saffron and crocuses. And in the Indian and Nepali tradition, they're using this to brew an entheogenic drug to induce visions. Do you think that there's anything like this within the Minoan religion or potential for that?
Yeah, and this is one of those contentious topics that some people actively really dislike this stream of research. So why we're even talking about this in the first place is because of this interpretation of Minoan religion as ecstatic. You know, if they're seeing visions, maybe they were taking drugs, you know, because of course you can see visions without taking drugs. You can see visions. And again, you mentioned the gestures. Gesture is a big angle of study because we don't have text. So we're like, okay, well, what are they doing with their arm? What are they actually doing? How can we read what they're doing from their poses and stuff like that? And one of a couple of researchers have suggested that some of those gestures and may have been held for really long times and caused, you know, certain visual effects. They may have been shaking a sistrum. They may have been doing this in a cave, so it might have been dark, you know, weird, dark, maybe candles, maybe. Anyway, the drugs, getting onto the drugs. So drugs may have been another way that the Minoans saw these visions. If indeed if they even are visions, because these little images, they could be visions or they could be some sort of signage that we can't read. But for a Minoan viewer, they're like, oh yeah, they know perfectly well what they're talking about, but we don't really know. And we think that they're images of what's happening religiously. Anyway, so we have evidence. We have evidence for alcohol, which you think, well, that's not very shamanic. But in fact, alcohol is the major drug that Korean shamans, at least historically, according to this particular researcher, that I'm not a specialist in Asian shamanism at all, but according to particular researchers who are, alcohol is a shamanic drug. It could have, we've got evidence for opium as well. So we know they had opium, we know they had alcohol, they might have mixed it together, they might have added other stuff. I don't know of any other, I can't think of any other drugs that have been found in Minoan
But the other one I wanted to ask you about, because I know this is a lot of speculation, it's a modern speculation, is the purple murex dyes. And there's a lot of people who relate that as an MAOI to these entheogens, specifically like within the Greek later traditions. Do you see any of that within the Minoan connection there?
Got to say, we know they also had mandrake, but we don't know if we haven't got residue analysis of mandrake, but we know that mandrake grows there and several other things grow there. You know what? I don't really know anything about that. I don't recall any Aegean archaeologists talking about purple dye in regard to any sort of drug use. So I really don't know about that, I must say. I don't, you know, I'm not like a super expert on.
No, of course.
Yeah. And I guess the thing is with people who study the dye, they're really, at least in Aegean archaeology, they tend to be very much more obsessed with, oh my God, ancient dye works. Oh my God, murex. Let's like try and work out, because people have done reconstructive archaeology where they'll actually go get a whole lot of murex sea snails and they'll cook them up and they'll make dye and they'll test it out and, you know, the different colors and stuff. But I haven't heard, and again, I haven't really looked at the shamanism stuff for quite a long time. So there could be new research, but I just don't know about it. So I'm not sure about that. So sorry about that.
No, it's just because like Ammon can talk about this more with his research. He finds the purple dye at the center of a lot of these Dionysian rites, specifically use in the purple dye in the eyes and purple dye used with alabastrons that are being used rectally to administer different oils and drugs. So
That's interesting because there were these vessels found in Israel at Tel Asafi Gath that look like butt plugs.
Mhm.
And I know the excavator and his associates sort of was talking about them as butt plugs as a bit of a joke. But I thought he did publish something. In fact, he did. I know he did. He published something. There's some text in the biblical, in the Bible that talks about hemorrhoids, and then there's these things that look like butt plugs. And I know he published something about that because Israelite archaeologists often have to refer to the Bible as just another type of evidence. Not
Right.
like they're trying to prove the Bible or something. That's what they used to do when they were religious. But now they kind of use the Bible is just another bit of evidence to sort of add to what they're trying to decipher. But yeah, you can easily follow that trajectory up by looking up research about Tel Asafi Gath. It's just so the site is called Tel Asafi. That's the I think Es-Safi is the Arabic name. It means like the pure white mound or something, but it was called Gath, Gath, in the biblical text, so it's called Tel Asafi Gath. So I've excavated there. I remember when those butt plug things were excavated. And I know him. So his name's Aaron Mayer, and my supervisor Louise Hitchcock publishes a lot with him. So you can definitely look up those vessels. But I just thought that sounds interesting in regards to anything to do with that sort of bodily area. Of course, we don't know if they were butt plugs. They just happen to look a bit like they're ceramic. So
Right. It's because and we'll bring Ammon on shortly, but he talks about a lot of this stuff in his research because he's looking into a lot of the medicine and he's looking into these cults around Medea. And he sees a lot of this gynecological medicine that's used that they're using these alabastrons to administer oils and herbs either vaginally or rectally, Actually, Ammon is here now, so I'm going to bring Ammon on and he can help us ask some questions here. So let's say hi. Hello, Dr. Ammon. Hi, how are you?
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Dr. Tully. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Are you you Israeli?
No. I'm not. I did
just because of your name.
I did a little archaeology over at Tel Megiddo, but that's my only exposure. I'm a classical philologist, so I stay on the side of the text, and I came up through the pharmacology, the medicine, working with Dr. John Scarborough, and from there kind of joined a master's in science to that, to flesh out some of the fields that hadn't been, how it is, the fields that hadn't been investigated. Nobody looks at drugs, right? Nobody looks at, we have more drug texts than we have anything from antiquity. More drug texts. There's thousands of pages of Galen on drugs, thousands. I've got antidotes from Nero. Dr. Tully, you probably have never heard. Did you know there's a famous formula that Nero uses? That's a compound drug mixture that induces hallucinations. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, because nobody reads these texts. Those are the ones that I work with. And so I like your connection to the Minoans. And I just wanted to ask you, we find this purple in Linear B. I worked with Emmett Bennett. I didn't work with him. I had the privilege of studying under him. And we have these elements we have the word pharmacon, right? We have the word drug. We have words for ointments. We have words for medical applications. We have words for specific drugs. We have words for priestess. We have words for initiation using that mu upsilon root in the Linear B. So the Mycenaean Greeks appear to have been well centered within this world that ultimately develops, that we see filtered in to the classical text. And whether it's through Homer with Helen putting in her care-killing drug into the mixture and getting us also high that we can watch somebody kill our family members and it doesn't bother us, or if we're on the sheer medical side working with Galen on why is it that mandrake is used along with the other drugs that Roman doctors use to put people to sleep. Why is it superior to straight opium? Stuff like that. Augustus using opium. So that's kind of my background, that I came through these strange texts. And the magic text, you know how it is. You've read the PGM. Have you looked through the Greek magical papyri, probably somewhere along the line?
Yeah.
Yeah. The immense quantity of drugs that is in there. People don't realize it. When they were creating that edition, that translation, they asked different classicists. There's a whole list of them, different classicists in different areas of expertise. John Scarborough did the medical side, and you don't realize how much medicine is interwoven. So, I guess where I'm going is knowing that. Do you think it's fair to say that the Bronze Age mystery that's being practiced is Bacchic? It's Dionysiac. We have the name in Linear Beat Dionysus. I heard before you guys were talking about who are the gods. I can give you one. Dionysus, we know, is there doing this.
Yeah,
mystery.
but he's in Linear B, so he's from the Mycenaean period. So we don't really know if the Minoans had a Dionysus, although of course they had alcohol. Yeah. So, but
That's what I wanted to know. Yeah. Do you think are there any indications that you can trace that pre-Mycenaean religion? That's, I guess, it's hard without the code cracked. Without that Linear A, you guys are in the bushes. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. I'm not I'm really not I'm not up on the Linear A. I have to defer to my colleague, Dr. Brent Davis, about that. But the thing is, using the term mystery, are we going to say that was it a mystery? Is ecstatic religion necessarily a mystery? I'm just not sure about that. Especially if the government of Crete or different, regional governments are doing ecstatic religion, because, often you think shamanism or shamanic type of religion is, it's just off in religion, or it's of a more primitive type of society. But its shamanic religion was a feature of certain state level religions. Are we saying a state level religion was really concerned? I'm not saying there's no mystery or no ecstatic religion, but I don't think it's like the primary concern of a civilization, is because they've got to actually run the joint as well. They've got to kind of, who's running the joint?
I think when Bacchus steps into town with the Athenians and brings that procession to the stage, you have the movement into the government. I think the oracles. Can I ask you about, we know the oracular tradition is strong. We know that those women were governing in the sense that somebody wants to put down a colony, so-and-so place.
Yeah.
You got to go and you got to have it cleared by the oracle. What do you think there's a Minoan? Do you see any Minoan precedents, any indications that there's, again, I know it's hard because you don't have the text, but any indication that there's oracular religion?
Well, let me just say the Delphic Oracle was a woman over 50 who was a simple, uneducated woman. And so there's arguments about how much she knew about running states and, how ecstatic she was. Did the priests do the interpretation? The more politically savvy priests interpret her oracle, etc., etc. In Minoan Crete, well, we can't, let's see, I'm just trying to think. So whether they spoke oracular utterances, I would suggest they definitely would have, just because, divination and oracles and consultation with deities is common. So I can't think of an example where, look, look, there's a lot of seated women and there's processions, and they're not always necessarily bringing things to the seated woman. So they could be coming for a consultation. Yeah. But again, if you're going to decipher it from images, I'm just trying to think through the images. I'm not sure. I would say, yeah, just from thinking about comparative examples, definitely some sort of oracles and wise people would be being consulted. You know, people who themselves are then consulting deities or however they perceive the supernatural realm. But I'm not sure that I can, I couldn't point to necessarily just off the top of my head, trying to remember the whole corpus of Minoan images, which one might be doing oracular consultation. Yeah. Except maybe the Delphic oracle sat on a tripod. Maybe someone seated could very well be being consulted and not having offerings brought to them. Yeah. Or even they could have offerings being brought to them and being consulted at the same time. So they certainly may have said sort of, wise, God-inspired sort of stuff. They might have been on drugs. They might have said it without drugs. So, yeah.
What do you think of the image of the witch, Medea? And when I say witch, I mean the ancient queen, who is, the distinguished granddaughter of the sun.
Love Medea.
Yeah. What do you think about her power? And rip yourself away from the stage.
Yeah, I think just because we see Medea as such a central figure throughout modern paganism. Do you see this connection in your work to the Minoan? I've read a lot of people who try to connect her to that snake priestess figure. And what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, some later, especially I think in Roman versions of Medea, she is thought to be the foremother of snaky people. She in Seneca's Medea, she uses I think every snake she can think of. She calls the poison from all those snakes. Yeah, that's a good question. But again, with the Minoan snake, guys, there's so many problems with the Minoan snake figurines. There's a big argument that the smaller one's not even, when you look at the reconstructions, that she's not even holding snakes. Some people think they say, oh, snakes aren't spirally patterned, but then if you actually look at Cretan snakes, it certainly could just be an artistic rendition of the patterns of actual Cretan snakes. But Cretan snakes can't bite humans. And I think they're all not poisonous except for the cat snake. So, yeah, one of the explanations of Medea's use of her invocation of exotic herbs and snakes is that it's Seneca showing how knowledgeable he is, and how it's an example of Roman erudition, where they talk about a lot of foreign ingredients or foreign animals to show the reader how clever they are. Look at all this stuff I know about, say, I can't remember the agriculture. Is it Columella? Somebody who's a big agricultural poem, and he talks in this particular way. So instead of saying Dionysus's wife, is it Berenice? Anyway, he'll go in a roundabout way. He'll say, the beautiful comb that's in the stars, and you're meant to go, oh, of course, Berenice's hair, or if you know about mythology. So it's like with the Greek magical papyri, there's that school of thought that thinks these ingredients, or these kooky ingredients are, it'll say, get a hyena's toe, and someone will say, oh, well, that's actually just a metaphor for this particular plant. So are they being literal, or are they sort of doing metaphors? Are they trying to just show how clever they are in the composition? Because you remember, all the ancient Greek witchcraft, it was written about by men. There's no text by ancient Greek female witches or ancient Roman witches. They're written by men. So, were these women even real?
No, you raised some really interesting points. I think about, there was that recent archaeological find, Ammon, this one, where I think it was this year or last year, where they found hair of a priestess. And when they analyze the hair, it's filled with datura-like compounds, atropine, and a bunch of other drugs, and all this other kind of really intense stuff, you know? So there, I mean, and then I wondered, like, have you found any women who are writing any of these medical texts? Because I know that you've contested some of those claims through your research.
Yeah, that's typically what classicists get on the subject. The problem is when you jump into the drugs, you jump into a world of texts that are all about how to keep you alive under terrible situations. This is all stuff that has to work. We're not in a literary world anymore, right? We got to go into the dirt where they were. And so that list of drugs, for example, the list of snakes in particular that you see in Medea is the same list of snakes that you see in Andromachus, the chief or arch physician of Nero. It's in the theriac that he took from the east. You can buy, as for snakes being on Crete poisonous, don't let that hold you back. There's a Bronze Age trade, right? You can buy, as far as Rome, you can get venom from horned vipers in North Africa. Imagine the efficiency, right, of figuring out that transport. That's why the drug formulae aren't, for example, you can come out of Rome with things from the market in North Africa, and you can make formulae for it, not based upon what you've got locally. That's why the people who did the Menorca dig just recently, and they don't know that, they haven't said that she's a priestess, right? They haven't said that. They don't know. They're trying to figure out the context. That's why they're so shocked that you could find hyoscyamus and scopolamine and atropine in that hair, because some of that stuff may not grow locally. And that's the thing. Dioscorides tells us about where these things are traded, where their nicknames come from, their street names. So when you go into the pharmacology, you're stepping out of this literary world into the hard, cold reality. And classicists hate this. This is where they don't want to go. There is a thriving drug culture that we are not recognizing, because our own lens says the founders of Western civilization wouldn't be involved to that extent. I'm
that's
wondering
why the
if
Minoans were thought to be embarrassing, because they thought, oh my God, look at them. They must be all on drugs. They must be drunk. They're off their heads. Why would they be doing this ecstatic religion? But I was just interrupting because I was going to say, what do you think about, in Brian Mirescu's book, he talks about that sanctuary of Demeter and Persephone I think it's inland from Emporia in Spain. I think it's the side of Emporia, and they found a skull and it had ergot in its teeth, and they had residue analysis in a cup. And see, the whole thing about ergot is, when it's synthesized as LSD, that's all fine and well. It's been, it's much less harmful, but ergot is really dangerous. So people doubt the use of ergot because they think, how could these people have possibly been able to dose this safely? So what do you think about, dosing ergot?
It's the idea is, when we think of singular drugs, they didn't. They had compound polypharmacy. So you are balancing one compound mixture against another. They called it the dote and antidote, or the pharmacon and antipharmacon. That's the terminology. And so you're talking about a balance from the beginning. And these physicians are saying you can give so much and it has this effect, so much, and the person will start becoming drowsy, and then you give 3 times as much and the person will die. So yeah, dosage is definitely there. As for the dangerous nature of it and whether or not it would be there, that's the same question that they're asking about the scopolamine. Scopolamine induces psychotic delusion. Why would you want a bunch of psychotically deluded Bacchants, right? That's why the historical personage of the Medea, I think, is so important, because she is that polypharmacon. That's what the Homer calls her, right? Circe, excuse me, Circe, which we know all the different interpret, sister, mother, doesn't matter. She was Medea. Who is this female ruler? Because Circe rules the Etruscans, right? She has her own kingdom.
But how can she when she's a goddess?
Yeah, is that
she's the daughter of the? But is she the? She's in Homer. Well,
yeah,
she's the daughter of the sun.
Yeah.
So how can she rule the Etruscans if she's a supernatural being?
Yeah, maybe that's what is required in the Bronze Age, is the rulership from the Holy Line. Right? I mean, how different is that from what they're doing in Egypt?
Sure.
I just think about what we were talking about earlier, Dr. Tully, with what you were saying with these Minoan priestesses who are doing that form of embodying of the deity, the shamanic trances. Could it be something like that?
Well, I would say certainly rulers claim supernatural ancestry or powerful mythological ancestry. The thing is, that's the thing with the Minoans. That's another problem, is the ruler was Crete ruled by a king or a queen or factions or a company. No one knows, and that's a big fight in Aegean archaeology. Is the prominence of women. People go, oh, must have been a matriarchy. Look at all these women, but there's a lot. But it's a prominence in visual art, and we have a prominence of women in visual culture now. Do women rule the world? No, they don't. So we don't know. I would say rulers would claim divine lineage. Rulers would, we know the Minoans had a lot of feasts and there's a lot of cups. So we know they drank wine. They know they had opium. They may have had other drugs. They may have drugged everybody out in a fantastic party, but I haven't heard of any residue analysis that has supplied anything other than opium and alcohol. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just that I haven't looked at the drugs for like a few years. So I might be behind on the drug research in Crete. But yeah, so, Homer's not, Homer's literature. So Circe, she could have been a queen. I mean, really, she's thought to be similar to the Mesopotamian Siduri, the alewife, so a beer maker. And, Brian Morescu is always suggesting that all this beer had drugs in it, it was enhanced. So, yeah, I don't know. It's such a long time ago. How can we know? I'm not sure.
It brings up some really interesting things. Like when you were talking about the ergot, I was doing some research into this, how different cultures were processing it. And on the Indian side, you have it being processed by cows and then the drinking of urine. And there is some thought about utilizing goats and drinking the goat milk on the Greek side, because you see all these references to the sacred goat milk with Almathea, the goat mother of Zeus, and also the goat milk being talked about within the Bacchic rites, etc. And
what about the flyagric mushroom? Apparently people have to it's better if you drink someone's urine who's already eaten the mushroom, etc. So that's a really interesting sort of, how did that happen? Like, did someone accidentally drink it and then go, oh my God, I'm tripping, so how did they know? I mean, you can say that about anything. How did anyone know? Obviously someone experimented over thousands of years ago. I don't know. It's interesting in regards to synthesizing something through another through a living creature, like I guess you can have psychedelic honey, if the bees are going to a psychedelic plant and things like that. My friend Andrea Sinclair is the one who really knows about these sort of things. She's much more up on the topic than me, but she's really looking more at the Egyptian evidence. So yeah.
What do you think of the psychotropic cup of porneia the cup that comes from Lady Babylon, that is her fornication, is the
Oh, you
Victorian
mean that
system.
completely mythical,
What is
that mythical goddess derived from the Book of Revelations by Crowley? I think the cup of, I think Babylon's cup is on one hand a uterus, so it's a sexual vessel. On the other hand, it's the cup of experience. It's about, you know, she's the sacred whore, open to all, mastered by none. So it's about just all experience going into the cup. I think it's a mythological cup. That's what I think. I'm not necessarily correct. So that's my take on Babylon's cup. I think it's part of the sexual, Crowley's sexual magic kind of symbolism.
But surely Crowley can't have anything to do with the text. The original source, you know, is John.
But Babylon is not. But
you're
Babylon is a city. She's not a goddess. It's Babylon the Great has fallen. It's a metaphor for actual the city of Babylon. It's not a goddess.
okay. So metaphorically, what do you think her cup is? He calls it. He says it's full of
I think John is a bit. Well, again, you know, interestingly, in regards to John, how did he have these very weird visions? That's one interesting angle. But B, I think, well, he was really negative about that. So I think it's, you know, I don't know that much about John or the New Testament sort of followers of Jesus. Not really that up on that. But I think he was anti-polytheistic societies, like, you know, Mesopotamian societies. He was, some people say that Babylon was a metaphor for Rome, that, you know, the B666 is really Nero. I've kind of only heard about that. I'm not like a specialist on that. I think John is basically kind of apocalyptic in a really negative way. And I think Crowley just sort of turned that around and turned it into a positive. So I'm not sure.
I'm just wondering. The only reason I threw it out there was I'm just wondering, what is that cup? He says it's got that porneia. It's full of that.
But isn't porneia something to do with like sex and pornography?
It
like,
is used,
like prostitution?
It is used both for the production of intercourse and the production of what happens in the templum.
Yep.
So it is translated both as fornication and idolatry. But her cup is full of it. And I'm just wondering, when the Ophites are drinking semen, you know, there's a lot of drinking semen classicists don't want to talk about. Dr. Tully probably knows this better than I do. They don't want to talk about drinking semen, right? Or using the human body to create communion. Guess what? The doctors are doing that. I've got a passage of Galen that talks about the serous deposit of the underdeveloped breasts of somebody who's under the influence of venom and what you can do with it.
So you're suggesting that maybe these, like, people were synthesizing drugs in their body, and then people were consuming bodily secretions, and maybe that's what this. Well, you know, I mean, I'm really more familiar with the Crowleyan interpretation of Babylon, but, you know, menstrual blood, that's a big deal in regards to the cup symbolism. So, I mean, menstrual blood, you know, menstrual blood is a ingredient in spells that also have hallucinogenic or poisonous herbs, especially in, like, you know, late 17th century France in the Fair of the Poisons and things like that. So yeah, but I just think with John is having a sort of he's in an ecstatic state. John himself is in an ecstatic state, and he is sort of talking. He's talking about whatever this vision is, that pretty intense apocalyptic vision. I don't really know what John thinks, but, you know, I'm open to, like, other people's opinions about what that might be. So yeah, I really am not really that familiar with, you know, people synthesizing drugs actually out of their bodies. The only one I know about is the Vikings and the flyagric mushroom.
Thank vagina. In Greek, the kolpos. Medea is described as removing her drug from her kolpos. And the only reason I know that so well, because it's a minor reference, the only reason I know it well is that becomes a major image within the Theriac tradition. They talk about that dark harbor where one is able to receive the Galene. What is the Galene? It's the balance. It's the antidote to the dote. So,
and what text is she described? Which text is that she's described as doing that?
The kolpos.
Yeah, which text?
Not only it's several. Seneca talks about her taking her drug ex sinu, which
Isn't that in Latin though?
Which they tend to, but it also means the same thing, from that sinus. And then kolpos is hang on. Dr. Ruck wrote about it just recently in his book on Samothracian mysteries, and about the origin of Medea's ejaculate as the drug. And I'll get you that reference. I'll send it to Snappy, and that's why kolpos can be translated, as the Victorians just let us know, as both the vagina, or they say the membrum, the pudenda, can be the pudenda, or it can be that recess, because essentially it means that culprit is the recess. So
have you heard about the recent, reasonably recent discovery at Tel Arad of the marijuana on the incense altar? Because there's this guy Chris Bennett who's he's got very.
I'm actually going to be interviewing Chris, and I got access to his book. It's great.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking in regards to the thing is with psychedelic research. I'm not an expert on psychedelic research, so I can only say, oh yeah, well, that sounds interesting. I can't really say anything because I just don't know about, all I know about is what I've read, which is, a bit of stuff in, the Minoan, I know about the Minoan evidence. I know about what I've read in Brian Morescu and various psychedelic researchers from like the 70s.
What I want to ask you, Caroline, what I want to kind of switch focuses to is the goddess kind of figure that we're seeing across the Aegean area in the Levant and in Egypt. You talk about in your work that within the Minoan, there's this connection between the god, that priestess figure in the tree. And it makes me think of we see parallel gods, you have the goddess Asherah in the biblical tradition, or we have in Egypt, you have Isis, I believe, is associated with trees. So is Hathor. You even have it's Kudus, who's been also connected to Asherah somehow. So do you think that there's some kind of primordial goddess cult that's happening in the region around these trees?
I just want to say Chris Bennett thinks Asherah is related to marijuana, but I'll let him talk about that. So what do I think? Is there some sort of... look, I think it was an animist landscape. It wasn't just trees, it's mountains, it's the sky. Everything is animist. Everything is living. And I think sometimes human-shaped intelligences emanate out of these natural structures, like trees or mountains or whatever. And because humans relate most easily with other humans love anthropomorphizing deity. We know deity is not really in a human shape. Deity is much bigger than us. We're like ants to deity. Deity is like the universe. It's vast. If you think about aliens, they're not going to look like humans. They might look like if you look at, the TV show Futurama, they might be gas. They might be a drop of water. Who knows? They might be invisible. We only know about stuff on Earth. So we love to anthropomorphize deity. So I do think the tree goddesses, I think there's certain associations with trees, like sap is seemed to be milk-like. There's a maternal aspect to certain trees. The fruit, it's this benevolent, I'm giving you this food. Some trees were not female though. There's certainly male trees, but I've really more focused on females. And some, mountains like El, you know, the Asherah's husband El, he's a mountain deity, but he's obviously male. So there's male, you know, not everything is gendered female. I just think there's certain types of trees, the palm tree, terebinth. There's certain and trees that you find in desert, especially in the Levant, in Israel, in the desert. There'll be these trees. Trees are often a sign of water as well, so they're related to life. So there's this, you know, life-giving aspect of trees. What else do I think about trees? Yeah, I just think trees are and trees are human-like as well because they've got that tall vertical shape. I think there's just this tendency of humans and also humans to anthropomorphize. And also, if we want to communicate with non-human, like other than human persons in an animate world, what language are we going to try and use? Human language, so we want to anthropomorphize them. You can say that about any deities. What kind of language are we going to use to try and speak to them? And then, you know, there's that magical language that you do see in the Greek magical papyri, you know, strings of vowels, that magical language that's meant to be, it seems like nonsense, but it's actually meant to be understandable by the gods. I mean, the whole thing's unbelievably complicated. It's really about human relationship with the natural world.
For sure. Like, one of these things I wanted to ask you about is associated often with these tree cults. We see the establishment of these sacred groves, you know, where they're cordoning off these sites, you know, that are specifically for these kind of religious purposes and sacrifice. Are you seeing that like kind of sacrifice happening in Minoan that we see in like other places?
Yeah, there's definitely animal sacrifice going on. So there's a lot of images of women carrying goats. There's a lot of hunting images. So that could just be regular hunting, but there's women carrying goats. Sometimes there's actually, I can think of one ring image, which is a man, he's brought a goat to a tree. So is he going to sacrifice the goat there? Maybe you don't see him actually sacrificing it, but there's a goat, a man, and a sacred tree inside a structure. So I'm a little bit anti-sacrifice, but sacrifice is very common.
When are you guys going to? This is really my question. Now I've got you here as a Minoan scholar. When are they gonna crack that linear A so that you guys can flood the field with information? Is there something inherently crazy hard about it or something?
Yes. Yes, and this is what it is. Apparently, from my linear A informants, in order to decipher an ancient language, you need a certain amount of it, and there's not enough linear A to be able to decipher it. So if they dig up some more linear A tablets or objects that have linear A on them, and so the types of steps forward that I'm aware of is they'll work. And I'm not a linguist, so I don't really know the technical terms, but they'll present papers on amazing discoveries, and it's like, what, have you deciphered the whole thing? No, they'll decipher like half a word or something, and everyone's like thrilled. So it's really, really slow, and apparently it's not so much that I think linear A is unbelievably hard. It might be, but they don't have enough of it, but also they don't know what language it is. So they don't know, because we know linear B is Greek, but linear A, we don't know, is it Anatolian? Is it some sort of Cretan? We don't know what language it is because it doesn't look like other languages. And but again, I mean, look, really, I should probably have made more effort with linear A because it's a much more respected area than if I want to be respected, but because people don't really care about, flaky ideas about religion. They're really not that interested in the discipline. So, yeah, I should have probably made more effort with languages. But for all I know is that it's just not enough of it to do. So, but I don't know why that is because I don't know how to decipher ancient languages, so I can't really say.
I would be remiss, Snappy, thank you for letting me butt in. I would be remiss if I didn't ask. Somebody that I've been talking to wanted me to ask you about could it be that Minoan is a Pelasgian language? It goes old back to the Copper Age. I don't know. It just we see Pelasgian elements in Greek. So I'm just wondering, is it because it's not you're right. We all know that your field is right, that it's not Greek, right? Or else we'd be able to crack it.
Yeah.
What if it's something earlier, like that thing the Greeks
Yeah.
were throwing around saying is that precursor, that those tribes of horse cultures, north of the Black Sea who are coming down. Could it be Pelasgian, that Minoan, or do you think it's like just something indigenous to the area, something
Oh,
Aegean?
well, some people think it might be some sort of language from Anatolia, which is Turkey. It certainly, I don't think being really, really old is a problem because, cuneiform has been translated and that's really, really old. So I don't think that's the problem. I think anything human is probably, I think there's obviously some, again, I don't know anything about languages, or anything much. I think there's, probably some mysterious languages that no one understands anything about, but I don't necessarily think if it's old or if it's from, quite a faraway region, I don't think that would be a problem in deciphering it, but then I'm not really sure. We don't have we don't have, Cypriot, ancient Cypriot language either. So it's just really a problem of evidence, I think. Again, I'm not a specialist in ancient language. Wish I was. To tell the truth, I wish I'd done ancient Greek and Latin because I'd probably, be able to get more jobs.
What are your thoughts on this modern kind of pagan sort of trend that's going back to this Pelasgian side of worldview, where you see a lot of these like modern pagans who are trying to trace these roots to this universal ancient kind of shamanism and are looking to things like the Minoans and like Pelasgians for that context?
Well, what is the aim of
it? So a lot of these there's this trying to get to that original current, or that primordial paganism that existed before it was corrupt. You have a lot of these people. I think of like the philosopher Ludwig Klages, who talks about this idea of the lost imagination and this loss of like. You see a lot of pagan scholars talk about this idea that there is something that's lost when we develop technology and we lose these ancient languages that have a stronger ability to invoke metaphor and are more connected to nature.
Well, I think that would be a worthy pursuit. I just wonder, if you think about how old humans are, I'm not sure, is it just going to be one source? There might be many, because some things develop simultaneously on different, quite far away from each other and things like that. I'm possibly a little sort of skeptical about the aim.
I think of someone like David Beth, who's constantly identifying these kind of primordial traditions that are doing these ancient practices, some of which exist today, but they're all usually have this, for lack of a better term, sort of primitive mindset and practice.
Well, I think anything that actually helps us to step back from this extremely human-centered, internet-centered, social media-centered obsession and back into the real world, and especially anything that helps us interact with, let's call it nature or the environment, or the sky, the stars, the earth, the cycles, everything. I think that is all an extremely worthy cause, which I like. But I just don't know. I mean, is it like that, the perennial philosophy by, what's his name? Was it the guy, the psychedelic guy?
Yeah, there's a bunch of those guys. I know Frithjof Schumann was part of that. There's a few of them that are kind of weird.
So, and again, there's that there's that the psychedelic. When you take psychedelics, I guess in a way, a veil is opened, or I like to think of it as so here's the universe joined to your brain, and then here's the little social, I've got to act super straight and rational. And I see psychedelics as turning on the tap and allowing the flood or allowing the connection. So I think that's all extremely worthy. You know what? The whole thing with psychedelic, psychedelic research is only just coming back to be a sort of a acceptable, thing. People weren't allowed to study it for decades and decades. If you read Michael Pollan's, his book, How to Change Your Mind. And now, they're bringing psychedelic research back into, healing depression and helping people who've got cancer to sort of accept their death. I still think it's too hardcore for regular society. Like, regular society is anti-drugs because they have this sort of Protestant, you're not allowed to have fun. Fun is bad. You're getting away with something. If you're having fun, you're getting away with something and you shouldn't be allowed to. And it's also scary because how are people going to do shopping and renovating their houses if they're having a psychedelic experience? They might find those things not very interesting. So there's so many things against.
I do see what you're saying.
Adoption of this, yeah.
But and Ammon will back me up on this. But when we study a lot of ancient religion, you have at least these ecstatic rites, whether they're drug induced or not, are at the center, and they're these transformative experiences where usually it's described as you going through a death and rebirth state. So maybe this wouldn't happen often, but these are kind of central rites of entering either adulthood or later life that are so primordial across the human experience that I feel like there's something that we've lost, in our modern times, right?
Absolutely.
Like, I've connected with psychedelics and I found them it's why I'm here talking to you guys now. It sent me off on this whole excursion, right? And opened up a whole new perspective. Yeah,
I think there's something lost. And even, rites of passage for, age stages for, young people, profound initiations, whether they're just rites of passage ones or they're sort of relationships with deities type of mystery religion, more intimate mystery religion type of activities. Absolutely, we've lost all that, and it's terrible. I mean, look, the place is a wreck. Everyone's horrible. Look at all the wars. I mean, it's a nightmare here on this planet. Like, I always think, if any alien asks me, should I come to Earth? I go, it's really dangerous. No, you probably shouldn't. It's too dangerous here. I mean, it's, you can easily ignore all this stuff, but, it's pretty bad here. But yeah, so definitely, I mean, I'm not saying there were no terrible people in the ancient world. There probably were. There were probably a lot of terrible, awful people. And also they didn't have psychoanalysis, so they didn't do self-analysis. They're like, even though we have psychoanalysis now, but a lot of people don't analyze themselves or their motives. And it's hard to analyze yourself because you always want to do a really positive reading of yourself. You're like, oh, I'm actually really nice. Yeah, so I do think there's, but if everybody was to embrace this, I don't know, could be good. It's such a utopian idea, and it's so far off because everyone kind of is just, I think, TV is God, and advertising, and people with money who force their own ideology of shopping and renovating your house, if you're lucky enough to have a house, of course, shopping and renovating, that keeps people from looking at the universe. Because also another thing is, it's actually very scary. We're on a ball of dirt going around a burning hot, another ball. What is that? And there's a whole lot of other fireballs in the sky. What is that? What is the universe? It's insane. And so to think, people will be falling over with vertigo at the thought of that. So that's why a lot of people don't know anything about astronomy. Well, not that's why, but they're not interested. But astronomy it's about where we live. So I am totally pro freaking yourself out by thinking about the weirdness of existence, but most people don't. So you're just going to feel depressed. It's like when you go to work and everyone else is like shopping and renovating. And you're like, wow, man, look at like the star goddess is like so amazing. And they're like, you're mental, shut up. So
you're right. You're addressing a key issue, because you do see this thing where modern society has reduced us to either producers or consumers, and you're not allowed to do anything but one of these two functions, right? And that's all that's allowed to us, and we're always in this constant stream. And what I wanted to ask you is, like, you see a lot of paganism kind of coming out of as a response to this, sort of rejecting a lot of this modern technology, trying to return back to nature, re-looking to these kind of psychedelics. What do you think like the ancient world has to offer to us, and what have you gained from this kind of practice?
Okay, the ancient world has to offer it to us. I think, one of my favorite things that has to offer it to us but not only the ancient world, because animism is around in the contemporary world. I think it has to offer to us an animist view of an animist way of relating to so-called other than human persons. It's pre, the Industrial Revolution, so that it has. It's not really they didn't. It's not deliberate that they're pre-industrial revolution, but they had a world that was not very polluting. So there's a lot of problems from, like, for example, weaving. I'm a professional weaver, and weaving was the first thing to be mechanized and put all the weavers out of a job very early on. So now people really don't understand weaving. They're like, what is that? Spinning wheels, people don't understand how a spinning wheel works. Sometimes it's seen as just pointless to look back in time, but I think I think the ancient world can provide useful models of how things can be in the future. Like, that's why the second wave feminist movement was very into the idea of a matriarchy, because they thought, well, if it happened in the past, it can happen in the future. If women had power in the past, it means we can have power again. And there's various models of behavior and belief and a relationship with the world that it can offer. And we've got all these good things too, like now, because we've got really good medicine. What else have we got? I guess all the nice things, refrigerators, even though they pollute the environment, but they're a good invention. We've got all this good stuff. Washing machines, they're good. So there's good things about the industrial world, but there's all that pollution and that wage slavery and just, terrible weapons, really bad weapons that can kill people very easily and en masse. So that's very scary. So I think the ancient world can look like a utopian place, but I don't think it was all, roses back in the ancient world. You would have been, people didn't care about if you had sex with a child. They didn't care. Right. No one's going to protect the child. They had slaves. People could come and raid your village and just kill you. People can do that now, but it's probably going to be on TV, and there might be other people objecting. So yeah, it's not. I don't think it was a bed of roses, but I think there's certain things that are good about the ancient world, and a lot of people just don't know anything about it. They're like,
right.
Really.
That's what I think about a lot of classicists. They don't know a lot about it. That feminism from the 80s, 70s, and 80s and the classical scholarship, it was purposeful, but it was also very destructive. You said we don't have any women's sources. There's a section of Hippocrates that talks about don't go to male physicians for anything that has to do with your body. And he's talking to women. She says that. She says the men don't know. They just don't know. And
there's something in the ancient medical texts where I can't remember if it's in the Hippocratic corpus or where, but he says, everything I know that I'm writing about, I learnt from wise women. Something like that.
The midwives, This is Dr. Tully, this is what I keep trying to bring up with classes that they don't want to talk about. All this drug history goes back to the obstetrics and gynecology. This is all midwifery. The oldest drugs, you can ask to one of the guys at the Smithsonian right now, Alan Tuwaiti, and I watched him give a paper on why it is that all of our oldest drugs in the Greek corpus, why they're all drugs that come to us first through the women's medicine. And that one central drug, that oestrus, it's supposed to induce delivery. It's a cult drug that is a cult that is a delivery. And that Bacchic shout, that alalazo, that can also be the shout of the woman in the process of administering the drug. So it makes me think that there's a lot more about women that we've overlooked, and ideologically we've shut down.
Yeah, well, think about saffron, because you mentioned the purple pigment in Minoan fresco. Well, I'm probably more knowledgeable about the saffron pigment. They were using saffron, and John Younger and Paul Rehack have an article where they propose that the saffron was used in gynecological medicine, and that's why it was a women's color. Because, saffron yellow, even in the Roman bride, we're getting way back away from Crete, but the Roman bride's veil was a saffron yellow veil, and saffron krokos was a yellow instead of pink, which it is now, but yellow was this feminine color. So from saffrons, yeah. So of course, there's all this gynecological. Women must have been doing all this gynecological stuff. It's just that if it's, I guess the texts are for the textual people to argue over. I don't really know that much about them, but I think, there's a I don't know. I'm interested to know in what is because people do study ancient medicine in classics, but what is the problem with sort of, I'm not sure. I think people often follow things because there's a trend, or this is thought to be the respected angle of research on a topic. I think
it has to do with a lot of the perspective of the researchers, right? A lot of people are coming from this upper class male Christian background, for lack, not that there's anything wrong with that, but if you have that perspective, it's limited, and you're not necessarily going to, one thing that I've been researching is just looking into all of these drugs of gender transformation. And we see all of these rites of gender transformation across this world, right? All of these different Greek texts, and no one was talking about it until very recently, because they weren't looking for this stuff. It's not that it wasn't there; they just weren't, they weren't paying attention to trans anything. So they didn't. It's kind of like a relatively new thing, even though you have all of these references to these hormonal drugs that are being used, right?
Well, I don't know, because I'm not that up on the drugs. But that reminds me, I've actually got a book over there, but I'll never be able to find it because it's a big mess. But Ovid's, it's a book called Change Me, and it's all about Ovid's texts where a person changes sex through a god. They ask a god, change me. For various reasons, and it's really interesting. But somewhere over there in my pile, but that's more like a magical change. So.
Oh, for sure. Well, Emin has done a lot of research into the Scythians, and we know that they were using a form of mare's milk, a mare that was pregnant, to help induce these kind of gender changes. And a lot of even modern medicine is derived from the same kind of sources. They're coming from these pregnant horses, so you're seeing this really interesting kind of thing happening.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the contraceptive pill has something to do with horse urine, mare's urine,
right?
That's really interesting. Because I don't really think that much about medical stuff and hormone stuff these days. Although it's certainly a hot topic. Well, the Scythians, of course, were the big the big marijuana users, and also where the Amazons came from. There's a fantastic book about Amazons by Adrian Mayer. I know we're getting a bit off topic here, but I'm very into the Amazons. Yeah. So yeah, look, I'm really just not up on enough of that that sort of psychedelic research. And because the thing is, if anything I write about, like for an academic publication, I have to say, I can only really say what has been discovered, say with residue analysis and things like that. Like we know, for example, Crete has mandrake, it has henbane, it has thorn apple, which is probably an import, but we don't know if the Minoans used them because there's no evidence. So they might very well have, but we don't know if they did. So we just can't say we've got definite evidence that they used the mandrake, because here it is in this cup.
Like with the saffron, we do know that they're using it to dye the clothes to make the. Do you have any in like? Is it ever used in incense? Because we do see psychedelic saffron incenses within India.
Interesting point. There's a fresco. What's the house? Can't remember. It's on Acrotiri, which is Thera, Santorini. It's a fresco of a young girl holding a shell and what's been interpreted as incense, and it may have saffron on it, and she's got like a red ear, which was probably dyed by saffron, and I think red lips. But yeah, now what house is that? Anyway, there's only so many houses that people talk about. It's easily Googleable. It's just a young incense bearer. She's got like a sort of a shaggy cloak thing on, which some people think is made of sea silk, just because of the color, which is silk from the beard of certain shells in the sea. But yeah, so she's got this shell that might be saffron on top of like coals or something. There's various interpretations, but that's definitely one of them. So certainly that's interesting. But it's John Younger and Paul Rehack. I think the article where they originally talked about saffron use in gynecological medicine was in a book called it's women's homoerotic and homosocial something in the ancient world, but it's probably somewhere on the internet. It's probably on John Younger's. Actually, all John Younger's articles are on his website, and you can probably get them for free just downloading from his website. Is it called Women's? It's some book about women's stuff. Anyway, so yeah, saffron, interesting.
And then the last thing I wanted to ask you about is we see like there's all these frescoes with all of the women who are making the purple. And one thing that stood out to me is that they're all in this elaborate, they're in those elaborate dresses. And they got their, I don't think they would be wearing these kind of outfits if they were actually manufacturing these dyes. What do you think is going on in these frescoes, and why are you having these like prominent female figures doing this kind of manual labor?
Oh yeah, when they're in the Acrotiri, in the Zesty 3 house. Well, they're probably elite women, so they might have worn those clothes anyway. But also there's various interpretations of that fresco. Bernice Jones interprets it as a Demeter and Persephone story, but other people interpret it as basically that seated female figure as Artemis, and just these girls, they might be ceremonially plucking. It might be like a feast day where they've gone specially in their outfits to harvest saffron. It could be the painting only includes the elite girls who have the very elaborate clothing, the very complicated manufacture of their the patterns and the weaving techniques and the embroidery techniques. It could just be, this is a painting, so we're going to put them in the nice clothes just for the painting. They probably didn't wear those fantastic clothes all the time, although there's another fresco from Acrotiri of a townscape, and there's a woman carrying water on her head, and she's got a big elaborate skirt, but she's really far away, so you can see the silhouette of the big skirt, but you don't know if it's a really good spiffy one. But again, I think mainly people interpret, only the rich people are going to have the really well-made clothes, because poor people, they're too busy herding their sheep or digging a hole or whatever the hell they're doing. They're not going to be wearing those clothes. At least if they even have them, they're not going to be wearing them while they're doing work. But elite women, the thing is, elite women, they wouldn't have really done that much manual labor, but they may have done these religious, like they may have been, if there was a communal saffron gathering day or week or whatever, the elite women who are more important, you know, according to elite ideology, they may have gone first. You know, they may be representing goddesses or certain mythological figures, so they might have gone first to the saffron locations and done the picking. So, or their saffron might have had a special use, whereas other people's saffron had a different use and things like that. So we don't, again, we're just making it up according to images. We're just totally making it up.
And then I know like Carl Ruck talks a lot about the mushroom at being the center of Mycenaean civilization that comes later. Do you see like Amanita muscaria mushrooms in like a lot of like the Minoan stuff, or any references to mushrooms?
I'm just trying to think. I don't think so. I'm just trying to visualize. I should have reread my shamanism paper before I actually came on here, so I'd be more up on the drugs, the discourse about the drugs. I don't think so. I can't think of anything. There might be something that is totally obvious that I can't remember. Yeah, so no, I'm not sure.
And then I wanted to ask you, there's a lot of this speculation about where a lot of this Bronze Age mystery is coming from. And a lot of people are tracing it to Minoa or to Egypt. And there's all of this argument about, you know, where, you know, you have Greek scholars who are saying some of their gods are coming from Egypt. Some of them are saying they're coming from Minoa. What is your thoughts on the later traditions that are evolving in this area? Do you see a connection to Minoa, or is there a break?
Oh, where do the Greek gods come from?
Yeah.
Like, some of the, well, you know, in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, she actually says she's from Crete.
Right.
But whether that's just the text or, you know, what, who knows? And of course, you mentioned the Linear B text, so Dionysus. There's Greek gods mentioned. The Linear B texts come from Knossos and on Crete, and they come from sites on Greece. And goddesses, there's kooky goddesses like Pipituna or Dictina mentioned in the texts. I'm just trying to think. Okay. So there's Potnia Atana, so Lady Athena. Maybe that Atana is Athena. I'm just trying to think of other names of goddesses. And of course, in regards to Greek goddesses, Athena is very much like the Egyptian goddess Neith, a lot like Neith. And Athena is also a lot like Anat from the Levant. Really, culture moved from the Levant, from the east, you know, the Mesopotamia and the Levant, across the Aegean and to the west. So a lot of these deities, like a lot of these deities, really come from the Near East. Like Aphrodite comes from the Near East. She's Ishtar Inanna, really. Astarte. That's Near Eastern deities turning into Aphrodite. So, and the thing is, these places, it wasn't just everyone staying home. They were sailing around. They were trading. So they were talking to each other. So there's going to be different, and people, you know, brought their deities on their ships. And, you know, Aphrodite appears a lot at ports around the Mediterranean because people were sailing around. Yeah, so it's a bit of a melting pot, and there was interaction. They weren't just staying home. So that idea of, you know, pure Minoan or pure Egyptian, it just wasn't a thing.
Right, because I've also noticed, and I know this is highly contested, but because I've studied a lot of the Indian stuff on the Harappan side, you see a lot of similar imagery. You have this preference. You have the double-bladed axes. You see a lot of these mountain sort of phallic-like images. You have these snake women as well. Do you think there could have been a connection to Harappa at all through trade or anything? Like, I know there was references to lapis lazuli being brought over, and that is in Harappa. But do you think there was any direct connection there?
Well, chronology is really my worst thing. So I really don't remember what period the Harappan civilization is.
It's like, I think its height is around 2200, 2500 BCE, somewhere around there.
So that's like early Minoan. So the Minoans were sailing around. Certainly they traded way up into the Baltic, but it wasn't necessarily them. They might have gone a certain distance and then got something that had come from, someone brought that, east. They'd gone west. They'd meet at some island, I don't know, Sicily or something, or not Sicily, Sardinia, and trade stuff. So things trade with to the east or to the south or wherever certainly could have been happening. It's not a mystery. I can't remember I'd really have to reread my PhD thesis to remember the history of Minoan sailing. I know they were sailing around their own region, from the Paleolithic period around the Cycladic Islands and things like that. I don't think it's unusual that they would get materials from really far away because, we know that the Harappans were Mesopotamia and, people were dealing with India. And so people who got stuff from India may have then sort of traded that further east to, the Mediterranean and the Aegean, and then to Greece and to even further. So I don't think it's unusual, no. And, certainly religious concepts could also have been, that's the whole, as I said before we were on live, a lot of Minoan religion is interpreted by looking at Levantine religion, including the biblical text. Even though the biblical text is later, we know that the tree goddesses in the Levant went from basically the late Copper Age and into the Iron Age. So there's just this really long history of tree goddesses in the Levant, and it's much shorter in Crete. So it's really the Levant, that has the information. And so we're looking at the Levant as the model and going, well, maybe that's what's happening with Crete. Because the Levant they have the images, they have the sites, and they have the texts, whereas Crete only has the images and the sites. So, and we know they're all sailing around talking to each other.
And then I wanted to ask, I know, like Ammon, you were mentioning to me the other day about this idea of the destruction of Minoa and how it's talked about in Pindar and Thera. Like, do you see any of the Greek myths around the destruction of Minoa, and is there any truth to this? And there's references to Medea blowing them up or something.
I would go to Pindar's fourth Pythia, and I would say, okay, why is the Medwa, which is Mycenaean, why is she sitting there on the island giving oracles that are then handed down by the Pythia? So this is got to be some of the earliest origins of the oracle. Why is Pindar focusing on this one place and her prophetic power? If we think that Pythia was always a certain age person and a certain age, we know that she changed over time, and some of them got raped, and so they raised the age after a while because they didn't like that Parthenos getting raped, right? So it all comes down to know yourself, right? Snappy, it's just the data for me. We have to have the evidence. I don't want to make any conjecture. I don't want to have a grand formula or theory. I want those chemicals that they were on. That's why I say, were they consuming human communion? Was that part of the drug mixtures? Because it is later with the Greeks and Romans, right? So what are they doing in these societies? Dr. Tully, you said they're comparing the development of the Minoans to much later Levantine evidence. Isn't that just bad archaeology?
Well,
Isn't that
only the biblical text is later, but the Levantine evidence goes back to the Chalcolithic period. I was just going to mention in regards to Greek mythology and the destruction of the Minoans, there's always the myth of Atlantis, Plato's myth of Atlantis, which is over 1,000 years after the actual destruction of the Minoans, but may have something to do with, you know, the volcanic eruption of Thera, which didn't immediately destroy them, but certainly contributed to a bit of a nuclear winter, and would have caused a bit of trouble and may have weakened them. And I mean, the Cretans, there's earthquakes as well. They had frequent earthquakes. So yeah, no, the biblical text, the biblical text is later, so that's not a good comparison. But it's within, like, it cites images and the biblical text, and then cites and images. So the biblical text is later, but it's only being used because it's there. It's not like it's because it's only being used because it's text. But also we've got the Ugaritic texts as well, which is still also later, and they mention, you know, the Ugaritic texts, because in the Bible they mention an Asherah, but in biblical literature studies they thought, oh, it's just a wooden thing, it's just a tree. But it wasn't until the Ugaritic texts were discovered in about 1927 that they realized, no, Asherah is a goddess. She's the wife of El. So then we're like, oh, well, maybe that tree that they're talking about in the Bible called an Asherah, maybe that's a goddess too. Maybe that was Yahweh's first wife, you know. But some religious biblical scholars don't agree with that, but most religious scholars like now agree that the biblical Asherah probably was also a goddess. So yeah.
What is your thoughts on this theory that the Jewish people come from Crete, or at least directly influenced by Crete?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of that? This is something I've heard recently. There's all of this contention that that a lot of the biblical culture is actually Greek in origin, that it comes either from Crete or Alexandria, and that it's a result of this kind of Platonic sort of reimagining of society.
Well, the biblical, the Jewish myth is that they came from Egypt,
right,
and that they came into the land of Canaan, beat up the Canaanites, and moved in. But archaeology says, no, the Israelites arose within the hill region of Canaan. They were Canaanites, but they separated themselves off and called themselves Israelites. Look, that whole story of that's really interesting. Again, that's another topic. But I'm really not aware of like other origin stories of anything to do with Judaism particularly. Really.
It was a Roman historian, Tacitus, who came up with that. So that's probably from something older, right? Could there be a tradition? Because he also talks about Amun and Set and whatnot, and the worship of Zeus.
Well,
oh God, I love that. Don't you love that? I mean, Dr. Tully, when you guys crack Linear A, I swear, all those origin investigations, I think that's going to throw light on it. What do you guys need? Do you need a supercomputer or something?
Because Linear B doesn't tell us mythology. It's not like Homer. Linear B is shopping lists. Okay, this amount of wine to this sanctuary. This amount of women need to weave this wool. This is how many sheep we've got. So Linear A might tell us wonderful stories, or it might tell us nothing. It might just tell us shopping lists like Linear B does. So, I don't know. I mean, of course I want Linear. Look, the thing is with Linear A might ruin everyone's research because it might show that we've all been barking up the wrong tree. But
I love that. Don't you love that? Don't you love that?
Yeah, but when's it going to happen? It'll be interesting if it happens. Hurry up is what I've got to say. We're dying to know. But yeah, so a lot of Aegean archaeology is speculative because. But, then there's other civilizations that we don't have the texts from. But again, that's archaeology. Archaeology is really about material culture. It's not really about text. So that's why, because a lot of the people that study text, they're like, oh, you archaeologists, you all talk crap. You don't know what you're talking about. This is what the text says. And we're like, right. Because we're not really text specialists. I mean, not a lot of archaeologists are, but a lot of them aren't. So, yeah, I mean, some historians, I think archaeology can tell you a lot, but I think if you're an actual historian where you're actually really text focused, but then again, not all texts are true. So who wrote the text? What was their purpose? Are they telling the truth? Is this propaganda? What do they say? Why are they saying what they're saying? where did they get their ideas from? We don't, just because it's a text doesn't mean it's right.
That's why I love those Mycenaean laundry lists that you call them, which they are. I love them because it only has the very, like, does it have opium or the opium? It has the word drug, pharmacon, right? We can't build a false narrative around that. All we have is that one piece of evidence. Well, at least they had opium, right? At least they worship Dionysus. I love that kind of evidence. I don't know, maybe it's kind of some weird fetish thing for me, but I love it when you only get that hardcore science sitting there. Yeah, I love the field too that you're in. It's I think it's for classical studies. I think it's the future. I think people are going to move in that direction archaeologically. Do you think I'm wrong, Dr. Tully?
I'm not sure. I think a lot of university-based research is very conservative, and but then again, I come from a very conservative university, so there might be these radical people at radical departments. I don't think Melbourne Uni would stop people from looking at that sort of thing, but I can't think of anyone who's doing it there. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think, but it does seem to be a thing that people are not really looking much at what we would classify as drugs. That's for sure. I'm just, where's that book? Hang on a minute. I just got to get a book. Wait a minute. There's just some interesting research. Hang on, wait.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. This is going to be fun.
So get my thing back on. Wait a minute. So this isn't this is The Scent of Ancient Magic by Britta. Oh, sorry, why is it? Anyway, so she's a classicist and she's looking at perfume, like incense, perfume, herbal stuff in magic. So it's really interesting. So she's looking at the Greek magical papyri. She looks at ancient Greek and Roman witches and how they use herbs, and it's not just herbs, because herbs is like, yeah, we already know about herbs, but this is much more about fragrance and how, for example, in the Greek magical papyri, you would and it's not that unusual for a ceremonial magician now, because we're used to put a lot of incense out, but it's just, she's really focusing not so much on look how kooky these spell instructions are, but how they made the room, how they made the their environment fragrant, but also themselves. Like they would chew cumin seeds, they would chew other fragrant, they'd chew frankincense and things like that to make themselves really beautifully perfumed, as well as perfuming the environment so the deity wants to come in. And we're used to perfumes. We can get any perfume we want now, but back then it was a little more exotic. And everyone else stunk, but you had made this beautiful super fragrant room. So yeah, so she's sort of looking at plant materials that can also include drug type of plants. But I really just don't know. For example, the lack of reviews in academic publications of Brian Marescu's book. The only academic review I've ever seen was on Amazon, and I don't know. That was a really quite interesting, quite an informed review. Why didn't they publish it somewhere where people can actually read it who don't even know about the book? Because you're only going to read that review if you read the reviews on Amazon. Why are people not looking at this thing? Why did I don't know. It's just,
well, you mentioned Chris Bennett, and he had such a hard time finding a proper publisher to release his book. And his book has serious evidence, right? Especially now with these finds that they have of actual cannabis residue, So it's like an ongoing issue. And Emin can talk about this with his own experience trying to publish his book, which just came out of print. And I know, and now copies of it are selling for over $100 on eBay. And people have contacted the publisher, and the publisher went bankrupt, and now the book is in limbo. We don't even know if you can get it republished.
The Chemical Muse is still with Macmillan Press, so it's not that It's not that it went down. It's Macmillan, which I think is now the first or second largest press in the world.
But they won't reprint it.
It absorbed, it absorbed St. Martin's, but they won't reprint it because it doesn't fit the. They have a measure, they have a metric for that. They have a way of knowing what books to reprint, and it didn't make the list, right? And I don't mean list conspiratorial. I mean, it didn't sell enough copies to get kicked over into reprint, but they won't publish my follow-up to it because it has to do with uncomfortable things, drug use in the early church, and drug use within the mystery. And it's like one of the editors told me. He's actually the senior editor at what used to be St. Martin's. He said, we can't. We'll alienate half of our audience just by talking about drugs within Christianity. Just that alone.
This brings me up to something really cool that you were telling me about, Dr. Caroline, is that you're working on a book right now with Theon Publishing, and they're one of these really incredible publishing houses because they actually produce very academic quality books that are of a spiritual sort of pagan background. Can you tell us more about your upcoming book?
Yeah, so basically they want me to write a book that is about how to practice Minoan religion in the present day. And there's so much information. So I've got 47,000 words already written, but I'm sort of annoyed with the way the book is going, and I need to restructure it. Like, you need to print the whole thing out, read it, then you go, oh, that really should go over there. That you got to change. It's just a big job. And I've had all these other jobs interrupting it. So that's why it is taking me so long, but I really hope to get it done and submitted in June. And it's basically just my research, but I need to, I kind of talk about it for a non-specialist audience, so it's a bit more understandable, because if you read my actual PhD thesis, which is this book, which is the cultic life of trees, it's not that hard to read, but for example, the methodology chapter is kind of, it could put you off. So I won't be including that in the Theon Press book. So yeah, it's just...
If you're interested in her book, there's a link to the Cultic Life of Trees in the description. I highly recommend you check it out.
Because that book is quite expensive, I just need to say a lot of the stuff that's in that book is in article form, freely available on my Academia.edu page. So you don't have to buy the very expensive book from Peter's publisher, because a lot of the content is, not all of it, because, certain interesting angles are available in article form. Yeah, so Theon Press, I really want to hurry up with that. So I'm trying to work out, should I have illustrations? Because, those images, the ring images you showed before, I could have them redrawn, because I can't just, I need permission. I can probably get permission to reproduce them, but I don't know. It might be better to have somebody redraw them as more like scenes. Then I don't have to get the permissions, because, getting permissions for images is such a pain, because it takes so long. And sometimes people say no.
With a lot of these Theon books, you see this, it's both a practical application ritual guide as well as like a historical overview. Is your book going to be of a similar kind of structure?
Yeah, it's going to be here is what the Minoans did, and here is how this can be useful to us now. So it's totally, and in the end, it's really animism. It's animism with an Aegean lens, but it doesn't have to be Aegean in practice. It's really not so much about let's all copy the Minoans or let's do this Aegean thing. It's about what were they actually doing. They were interacting with their natural world, and it's about how to do that. It's kind of like a type of animistic shamanic type of way of relating, and the Minoans are the example. So they're really, look, this is what they did. You can do this in your world, in your environment. You don't have to be being a Minoan, because like although I'm quite interested in pagan reconstructionism, there's a lot, I think it's a little weird, like let's all dress up as a Roman and pretend to be Romans. I mean, that's good. I like it, but it's not the dressing up and the paraphernalia is not the main thing. It's what's happening here. So you don't need to dress as a Minoan. You don't need to, you can if you want, but it's not mainly about copying or trying to bring ancient Minoan stuff into the contemporary world. It's more like, what were they doing? What's the key thing or things that they're doing, and what I think is valuable that we can learn from them, which is again.
So, like, I know you mentioned a lot in your article. You talked about this research that was being done by the Dr. Felicitas Goodman, and how she took researchers to Minoa, and they were doing these yogic postures in the cave and such, and we're having these psychedelic states. Are you going to be recommending practices like this, or what kind of practices are you going to be discussing in your book that the Minoans were doing?
Yeah, well, actually, that's one example, which is the postures. So there's, all the postures are derived from Minoan art. So I probably won't be able to show the whole, corpus of Minoan art, but there's a certain workshop I do which is based on that Felicitas Goodman work, and I'll probably use an array of postures from that situation. Well, a lot of it is this sort of, it's about getting into ecstatic states. So certainly that is one method of getting into ecstatic states. Some of it is, it's trying to work out, or trying to actually form a relationship to talk to, say, for example, a tree, and trying to, a tree or a stone, because there's this tree stone combo that's a real thing also in the Levant, so Asherah and El. I think the stone is like an abbreviated mountain or just general rock landscape thing. It's about, and it's difficult. This is kind of difficult. It seems really simple. Just slowing down. You can use drugs as well, but slowing down to the point where you can really listen. What is this non-human form saying? How can I hear it? What are they saying? How can I then turn that into human language to tell somebody else? Because that's one of the key things is with this interaction with nature is how did the Minoans communicate with non-human nature? And sometimes it's certain later texts, like talking about the Greek site, the much later Greek site at Dodona, Zeus's sacred oak. Some people say it was the rustling of the leaves, and the priests and priestesses interpreted that, or some say it was birds. Birds were speaking in a human language, or maybe the humans, the priests and priestesses, understood bird language. So a lot of it's experimental. It's how can we, talk to non-human nature. So it is experimental, and so it's not necessarily giving answers, more like methods. Try this out. And it's not necessarily going to have the same result for everybody either. So, yeah, but again, speaking of undeciphered languages, how are we going to interact? And what is this non-human nature telling us? Because I'm really sick of, like, a lot of paganism is really human oriented. Like, people are obsessed with these social scenes, and I don't think that's what paganism is about. I think paganism is about how can we, it's about our interaction with our, the environment sounds kind of cliche, but the sky, the earth, the plants, our world, and that's the shamanic thing, really. It's shamanic kind of role is translating information, whether it's about, here's how to hunt the caribou or whatever. I've heard from, my shamanic contacts, and now I'm telling the tribe. It's, the shamanic method is, speaking to non-human contacts, and then, obviously learning whatever you need to, whatever's there, and then telling, because not everyone's a shaman. Not everyone's a priest or priestess. It's not, some people can't do it, or some people don't want to do it. Like, a lot of people actively have no interest. They might be interested in what religion can tell them, but they have no interest in doing it themselves. They need an intermediary, like a priest or whoever, because they're not interested.
I think from my own experience, just trying to develop these kind of skills, it takes a lot of practice, right? And you have to learn to sit in silence, and it takes like dedication and learning to meditate and these kind of things that a lot of people take for granted. You know, like they think they can just take a psychedelic and have an experience, or they think they can say a magic spell and see a deity, you know, and they don't recognize the transformation that's happening and the mental state that these people are going through. And you have to recognize how much work it is and how serious that these people are truly taking this, you know?
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that so-called witchcraft has really exploded, because people think it's just a matter of like, you know, oh, here's my bit of rosemary and here's my bit of salt and here's my jar, just moving them around. That's it. No, that's nothing. That's moving stuff around. That is nothing. You know,
Right.
It's not easy. It's not just about moving stuff around and buying stuff and moving it around. It's much deeper than that. But I think everyone's just obsessed with TikTok. Not everyone, but at the moment, especially young people, it's all about the cult of personality. It's weird. So yes, I think there's a lot more. I think there's, you know, a lot more effort that should be made in regards to the magical, shamanic, religious path. I just don't know what's going on at the moment in society. I think it's very weird. So
Yeah.
but apparently a lot of this has come from everyone being stuck at home in COVID lockdown. So it became even more internet focused than it already was. So, and you know, TikTok has something like over 8 billion people who call themselves witches. How can there be over 8? Isn't that more than the amount of people on Earth? How many people do we have on Earth? I don't know. But
Right. And it gets so, if you ever go on there, it's just all these people making wild claims, assuming authority and trying to generate income for themselves. And it becomes a really cancerous kind of toxic environment, you know? It's one of the downsides. Like Ammon and I have been talking about this a lot, like, and we mentioned this before our talk, it's that we're in this modern renaissance where we have untold access to these texts, like that the ancient world or anyone has never had before. But at the same time, now we're being bombarded by so much information that's trying to usurp our time, right? And we're kind of like at this really interesting kind of spiritual crossroad. So I kind of want to just wind down here. So I want to ask Ammon, do you have any last questions for Dr. Tully?
No, I just think she knows how I feel. I'm gonna be waiting for her to get back in touch with you and tell me we sat down and we cracked linear A. And at that point, I want to be involved. Whatever it is, Dr. Tully, I want to be it. When you guys open up that can of worms, because you're right, you said it so perfectly. It could change the way we look at everything. So I love the archaeologist's power. I love the art, and I commend you. I thank you for being out there trying to push the discovery, in the museum. And thanks for allowing me to throw some things out there at you. Thank you.
Well, thanks for telling me a whole lot of things I didn't know about in regards to, poisons and potions and texts and language, which I now have to follow up. I was just going to say in regards to linear A, and Asherah, there's this thing called the libation formula, and I can't remember exactly how it goes, but there's a word in it that looks like Jasasara. And some people have thought, oh, is that Asherah? Is this libation, is this Levantine Asherah in a text on on an object on a Greek peak, on a Minoan peak sanctuary? But then other people say, no, it's not Asherah. It's the libation formula is a different sentence. So some people think it might be talking about Asherah. Some people think, no, that word is not Asherah. It's just this other thing. But I can't remember exactly. I'd have to look up a whole article to explain that just very well. But I just thought I'd throw that in there because we're interested in Asherah. So yeah, so text, yes, it's not my strong point. I don't know when linear A is ever going to be deciphered. Wouldn't it be great? I feel like I need to Google this and see what the latest is. But yeah, I mean, look, if anything was happening, they announce these things. So anything that's worth hearing about, someone will be announcing that on the internet, and then we'll all know.
But yeah, it's been so wonderful having a chance to talk with you, Dr. Tully, and I recommend everyone go check out her blog, Necropolis, where you're going to find a lot of interviews. A lot of the pictures that I showed were all taken from her website. Also, check out her Academia.edu page. The first few ones are kind of just like previews, but if you scroll down, she has quite a few articles available. And as she stated, most of them are of her PhD thesis, The Cult of Trees. Like there's a lot of variety there. She has text on universal shamanism. She has one on the dyes. Really wonderful work. Make sure that you're supporting her. And she's also going to be having her book coming out on Theon Publishing, which will be coming out sometime in the next year or so. Is there anything you wanted to leave us with, Dr. Tully?
I don't think so, except to say thanks for inviting me to talk to you, because I really hardly talk to anybody and I get really bored. So it's quite a novelty to actually be talking to anyone that's at all interested in this sort of thing, because the actual archaeological scene, it's quite sceney. Yeah, so I'm a little isolated. Also, being in Australia, I'm quite isolated. You know, there's actually not that many people here. So yeah, so okay.
Yeah, I would love to talk to you again and do more of your modern paganism research, talk about Crowley and stuff. We only did a brief bit of that. But yeah, please, everyone, go and follow Dr. Tully and check out her blog. So thank you, everyone, so much. We've been, and make sure you subscribe to Lady Babylon and follow Dr. Ammon. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. We're drawing down the stars.